Good morning, everybody. This is a Random Stoner Explains, or A.R.S.E. And I'm going to do an update on 3i Atlas, and then I want to get into the story of Moses and Sargon of Akkad. So real quick on 3i Atlas. So the emissions that I was talking about in the other video seem to be water. And the interesting thing about them is that they're moving with more force than can be naturally explained, and they're actually the ones that are facing the sun are pushing against the solar wind, and are not being displaced, meaning that it's a jet, I guess, like I said in the last video, that's using more force than can be explained by just melting water, and that being the emission in itself. The cloud of debris, I guess, is the best way to explain it. Is like I said, it's being pushed by the solar wind outside of our solar plane, so it should be okay for us. It's like I said in the first video I made, it's made of nickel, which is something that can only be manufactured on Earth. Not meaning that somewhere in the universe there is a nickel-rich environment that could account for it, but that seems to be pretty weird also. But yeah, that's just a quick update on 3i Atlas, is that the jets that it's exhibiting seem to be shooting out water, which is interesting. And yeah, so that's that. So on to Moses and Sargon of Akkad, or Acadia. So this Moses never existed. That's just a story. And it's based on Sargon. Sargon the Great, as he's known. He was the man that established the Akkadian Empire 4,300 years ago, give or take. In his story, he was the son of a priestess. They're not sure how she became impregnated, because his father's never mentioned. And she took the baby, put him in a reed basket, sealed it, and sent him down the river, where he ended up being found by one of the king's gardeners, who raised him as a son. And he eventually worked his way up the royal court, becoming the king's official cup bearer, meaning that he carried the king's cup with him. And he came to power in a pretty interesting way. He was sent on a mission to deliver a tablet to another king. In the tablet were instructions to kill Sargon. He somehow just figured out the plot, returned and overthrew the Akkadian king at that time. And he became the ruler. He also was responsible for the widespread introduction of cuneiform writing, or the Akkadian form anyways, which became the basis for the Phoenician and later on the Greek and other Western alphabets. He was also a very just king, I guess. The reports are that while he was the ruler, there was no beggars and no one went hungry in the cities. Orphans were taken care of. I guess he was also responsible for establishing the first orphanages, and among other things. He also wrote a set of laws, which would more than likely be the second known set of written laws behind I can't remember the name of them right now, but there's some Sumerian laws that were written down, and so this would be the second set. Okay, so on to Moses and why he didn't exist. For one, like I said, that's just a story. The biblical Hebrews were just basically retelling a condensed version of West Asian history, and based Moses on the legends of Sargon the Great, like the whole reed basket thing, growing up, becoming, the king's court, and the Moses story is the Pharaoh's court, and Sargon's story is the Akkadian Empire's royal court. The whole "let my people go" thing never happened. So the 40 years in the desert is part of that story, of Moses' story, is based on the two Sea People invasions. So there was the first one in around 1207 BC, right after the fall of Troy. Like I said, more than likely the Sea People invaders were the remnants of Agamemnon's army. So after they sacked Troy, they just kept sacking cities until they got to Egypt. They were eventually defeated by Ramses III and placed in Gaza. So in between there was two attacks, 40 years apart, 1207 BC in 1177 BC. And this is about 1200 years after the death of Sargon. So, like I said, they're just, the biblical stories are just a condensed version. So they tied in the Sargon story with the Sea People invasion, and they made that the Moses story. The 10 laws or 10 commandments are based on the laws that Sargon the Great introduced into his empire. Sorry, things a little bit itchy sometimes. And then, or my eyelash anyways, or my eyebrows. So like, yeah, like I said, it's, you know, like there's a factual basis for all these mythological stories, which I consider the Bible is just a collection of myths. And the myth of Moses is based on an actual man that existed, who was a ruler. So the 10 plagues, like I said in my other video about the Libyans and the cult of the rat and their affinity for nighttime warfare, that type, I want to do another video on the 10 plagues themselves specifically and describe, you know, how or what they're based on. But just real quick, so more than likely in the Sea People invasion, the first one, you know, the people, some of those people were taken in as slaves and incorporated into the society. 40 years later, there's another Sea People invasion that coincided, but it wasn't a coincidence, with the Libyan invasion from the west, and more than likely a slave revolt inside the city of Cairo, or you know, Giza, I think, yeah, more than likely Cairo, and or the royal court was established, or the pharaoh's court. So the whole, you know, the put blood on your doorstep or your baby will be killed, more than likely was just terrorism by the Sea People Libyan army, you know, because like I said, the Libyans used to like to attack at night, and they were called the cult of the rat. So they were always represented in some sculptures as just a rat. And so yeah, anyway, like I said, in another video I'll get more into the 10 plagues. I'm just trying to tell you like how that story of Moses, the 10 plagues, the 40 years in the desert, the reed basket thing, are all stuff that happened, but it's just retold in the Torah as a story, you know, somewhat accurate story. Like I said, the Bible is kind of what happened, just, you know, it's kind of. And this is not a theory. This is all based on, this is not one of those if theories of mine. This is, you know, based on artifacts. Like I said, there's 1,000 years after the rule of Sargon, or 1,200 years, fall of the Akkadian Empire, there was tens of thousands of tablets that were burned and hardened, and they're being translated rather slowly. Like I said, there's only been a few hundred that have been translated. And so that's where the interesting thing about Sargon, though, is that his story actually comes from the accounts of the Sumerians, which would have been his contemporary rivals in Iraq, because Akkadia was in Iran and western or eastern Turkey. And so, like I said, so Sargon established laws like Moses, reed basket like Moses. He was, the thing about him though, that he was, in his rule anyways, really fair and just, meaning that like in his cities, the reports were that there was no hungry people, no beggars, the orphans were taken care of. So he more than likely to establish the first orphanages, or the idea of, you know, taking care of the orphans of the city. And yeah, so yeah, there's that. Because every time I bring up the thing about the Bible, and people get, you know, defensive because it's their beliefs. But like I said, it's just a story. You know, I mean, the flood, like I said in the other video, there's a basis for the flood. I want to get into the Adam and Eve thing and the snake in the garden in another video. That's pretty interesting too. Anyway, so yeah, so Moses didn't exist. Sargon the Great did. The 10 plagues happened, but not exactly how they're depicted in the Torah or the Old Testament. And like I said, that ties in a little bit to the Libyans' affinity for nighttime warfare. And the Sea People invaders being so numerous, they were referred to as locusts. because the way they came down the countryside from Troy all the way down to the banks of Egypt. This parting of the Red Sea, that probably goes to the second invasion where they were. There was a trap set by Ramses III. The Akkadians, or not the Akkadians, I'm sorry, the Sea People invaders walked into that trap. And so the number of dead is reported to have been so numerous that you could walk across them at the bridge. So that's where the whole parting of the Red Sea thing comes from. And like I said, I don't want to totally deconstruct the Old Testament right now. I want to save that for another video. I just wanted to do the Moses thing real quick. So yeah, this is not an if though. Like I said, this is more than likely what happened. The biblical era Hebrews in around 300 BC started writing out stories, and they adopted the stories of other West Asian cultures to assimilate. And yeah, that's about it. So, like I said, it's morning time. So I'm not going to say good night. I'm going to say have a good day and namaste. Like, share, and subscribe, and thank you for watching.